Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a door that takes 600 years to close. At first, you hear it the creak of wood, the slow pull of gravity. But because it moves so slowly, you barely notice. Generations pass while that door keeps closing, inch by inch, until one day the sound just stops. The room behind it is empty. This isn't a story of a sudden collapse or a dramatic ending. This is the story of how the Ottoman Empire lived so long that it forgot how to stop living, and how the world quietly changed around it while it was still breathing. The Ottomans were born on a frontier where nothing was stable. In late medieval Anatolia, borders meant little, loyalty meant survival, and violence was ordinary. Among countless small tribal leaders, one man named Osman carved out a fragile domain. He owned no great city, commanded no vast army, yet people gathered around him. Warriors, mystics, and wanderers believed his banner carried destiny. They didn't know what they were building, only that movement felt better than stillness. Osman's world was shaped by the decline of others. The Byzantine Empire was exhausted, hollowed out by internal conflict. The Seljuks had fragmented. In this chaos, the Ottomans thrived by being flexible. They married, they allied, they absorbed, and they adapted. Survival always came first. When Orhan succeeded his father, he did something revolutionary for a frontier warrior. He chose permanence. He took the city of Bursa and made it a capital. Coins were struck. Judges were appointed. Raiding became governance. What had been temporary began to feel inevitable. The Ottomans learned that power wasn't just taken, it was administered. Crossing into Europe wasn't a grand plan. It happened because opportunity appeared and resistance was weak. Gallipoli cracked open after an earthquake, and Ottoman soldiers walked into history without even realizing it. The Balkans were divided by rival kings who distrusted each other more than any foreign rule. Ottoman authority, though alien, felt predictable. Taxes were known. Law was clear. Daily life continued. Murad I understood that conquest alone could not sustain growth. He reshaped the military into something new. The Janissaries. They were not loyal to family, land, or tribe. They were loyal only to the state. Children taken, trained, disciplined, and transformed into soldiers of absolute obedience. It was ruthless, but it created a machine that Europe could not match. At Kosovo, Murad died, but the empire did not pause. That was the moment it revealed its true nature. Leadership could fall, but the system endured. Bayezid, his successor, moved faster than any ruler before him, crushing rivals and humiliating crusading armies. European knights charged with pride and died with confusion, unable to understand how discipline could defeat courage. Constantinople loomed like an unfinished sentence. It had survived sieges for centuries, protected by walls that seemed eternal. Bayezid tightened the noose, but before he could finish the story, a new power arrived from the east, Timur. The Battle of Ankara shattered the Ottoman state. Bayezid was captured. His sons fought each other. Provinces slipped away. Everything the Ottomans had built appeared to collapse in a single afternoon. This should have been the end. Instead, the empire entered its most important phase, survival through fracture. The civil war lasted for years, yet the institutions remained. Courts functioned. Taxes were collected. The idea of the Ottoman state survived even when its rulers fought each other. When stability returned, it returned stronger. Mehmed II was young, obsessed, and impatient. Constantinople haunted him. He understood something earlier sultans did not. Walls were no longer enough. Cannons rewrote history. Stone shattered under firepower. When the city fell in 1453, the world shifted. A new age began. Mehmed didn't destroy Constantinople. He needed it alive. He renamed it Istanbul and made it a living symbol. Roman past, Islamic future, imperial present. Scholars, merchants, and craftsmen filled its streets. From this city, the Ottomans ruled seas and deserts. Christians, Jews, and Muslims, all bound by law and taxation. Expansion became routine. Egypt fell. The holy cities came under Ottoman protection. The Sultan became caliph, ruler, and religious guardian combined. The empire stretched across 3 continents, a bridge between worlds. Under Suleiman, everything reached a perfect balance. Conquest, law, culture, and confidence all aligned. Ottoman armies marched with terrifying efficiency. European kings calculated policy round Ottoman reactions. Suleiman's legal reforms created an order that lasted for centuries. His architects reshaped skylines. His reign felt like destiny fulfilled. And therein lay the danger. Perfection leaves no room to change. After Suleiman, expansion slowed. Without new lands, the system strained. Soldiers expected pay without conquest. Officials turned their positions into personal property. Bribes became routine. The elite janissaries settled into cities, defending their privileges instead of the empire's borders. Innovation started to feel threatening. Tradition hardened. Meanwhile, Europe transformed quietly. Oceans opened. Wealth flowed from new colonies. Science accelerated. Ottoman trade routes lost their relevance. Inflation crept in. Silver from the Americas destabilized the currency. Peasants suffered. Rebellions flickered in distant provinces. The empire still stood tall, but it had grown heavy. Sultans withdrew into palace life. Princes were raised in isolation, protected from rivals but also from reality. Court politics replaced battlefield courage. Power shifted to viziers, mothers, and factions. Some rulers were capable, but others were just shadows. The continuity survived, but the energy was fading. The failure at Vienna in 1683 marked a turning point no treaty could hide. For the first time, the Ottomans were no longer feared as inevitable conquerors. Europe advanced. The empire retreated. Borders contracted. Each loss felt manageable on its own, but together, they reshaped destiny. Still, the Ottomans refused to vanish. They adapted again. Diplomacy replaced dominance. European advisors were hired. Cannons were imported. Schools were founded. Uniforms changed. Even time itself changed, measured by clocks instead of just by prayers. Reform became the new strategy for survival. But reform cuts both ways. Each change threatened someone's power. Janissaries revolted. Sultans were deposed. Violence erupted in the capital. The state learned that saving itself meant destroying parts of its own past. Then, nationalism crept into the empire like a slow poison. Greeks dreamed of independence. Serbs remembered old kings. Bulgarians whispered of rebellion. Armenians sought protection. Arabs imagined futures beyond Istanbul. Loyalty fractured into identity. By the 19th century, the empire was exhausted but still alive. Railways stitched provinces together. Telegraph wires hummed with orders. New laws promised equality. Yet trust had evaporated. Reforms pleased no one completely. The empire still functioned, but it no longer inspired belief. The phrase "the sick man of Europe" spread across the continent. Not dead, just endlessly ill. The 20th century arrived without mercy. The Balkan Wars stripped away land and confidence. World War I delivered the final strain. The Ottomans entered the war not from ambition, but from fear of isolation, fear of dismemberment. The gamble failed. Armies starved. Provinces rebelled. Foreign powers began planning the empire's future while its rulers still pretended to rule. Centuries of coexistence collapsed into chaos and tragedy. Borders dissolved. Authority evaporated. When the Sultanate finally ended in 1922, it was quiet. A ship left Istanbul. There was no final battle, no grand coronation, just a departure. 6 centuries concluded not with fire, but with fatigue. Yet, nothing truly disappears. The Ottoman Empire did not end. It dissolved into nations, laws, customs, food, architecture, and memory. Its mosques still breathe. Its streets still curve. Its echoes still linger beneath domes and along the Bosphorus. So as you drift off to sleep, remember this. Empires don't just fall because they are weak. They fall because time changes its rules. The Ottomans lasted so long that they outlived the world that created them. And like a giant, growing tired of holding the sky, they slowly, quietly, and finally, let go. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe for more. Let the night settle a little deeper now, as if the world outside has grown distant and unreal. The Ottoman Empire, a titan of history, had already lost its strength, but its final moments were not loud or dramatic. They were slow, careful, almost polite, like an old man putting his affairs in order before sleep. After the Great War, the Ottoman world existed more in memory than in reality. Foreign soldiers patrolled Istanbul's streets, their boots echoing where sultans once rode in grand processions. The palace still stood, its gates guarded, its ancient rituals performed, but all real authority had drained away. The sultan signed papers that changed nothing. His words floated through empty halls and dissolved before ever reaching the provinces. For ordinary people, confusion ruled daily life. Bread grew expensive, coal was scarce. Veterans returned from the front lines with haunted eyes and silent stories. Mothers waited for sons who would never come back. The empire that had framed their lives for centuries no longer felt solid. It felt like a morning fog, present but without substance. Yet, far away in Anatolia, a different energy was gathering. Officers trained in the last years of the empire, men who had seen the world change firsthand, understood one truth with absolute clarity. The old order could not be restored. They had seen reform fail and loyalty fracture. They did not speak of divine right or imperial destiny anymore. They spoke of land, survival, and a newfound sense of national dignity. From ruined barracks and remote villages, a new resistance organized itself. Piece by piece, they were fueled not by grand ideology, but by the raw instinct to protect what was left. The Sultan in Istanbul watched these events unfold from behind his gilded palace walls. He had inherited a crown without power, a throne that inspired no fear. So, when the decision finally came to abolish the Sultanate, there was no great outcry. No loyal armies marched to defend 6 centuries of unbroken rule. The silence was the real answer. The empire had already left the hearts of its people long before the law declared it gone. Soon after, the caliphate ended as well, a title that had linked faith and empire since the age of conquest. A symbol of Islamic unity for generations, simply disappeared with a government decree. For the first time in centuries, the Muslim world existed without its Ottoman center. It wasn't a moment of pure tragedy or triumphant victory. It was simply change, inevitable and profound. The empire dissolved into something quieter, more personal, memory, across its former lands. From the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula, people struggled to define themselves anew. In the Balkans, new borders reopened old wounds, setting neighbor against neighbor. In Arab lands, promises of independence made during the war faded into bitter disappointment. As new powers drew new lines on the map, the vast Ottoman roof, which had sheltered so many different peoples for so long, had vanished. And beneath the open sky, every difference suddenly felt sharper, more dangerous. Yet, the empire did not truly vanish. It lingered in habits and customs, in laws that were adapted rather than erased, in city streets still shaped by imperial planning. It lived on in food, in music, and in the rhythms of daily prayer. It survived in the very way people imagined authority, and in the way great cities like Istanbul and Cairo continued to breathe. For those who remembered Ottoman rule, the emotions were a complex mix. Some missed the stability and predictability it provided. Others could only remember its injustice and decline. Most, however, carried both feelings at once. The empire had never been a single, simple story. It had been millions of different lives layered together, held in a delicate, often uneasy balance. Historians would later search for the exact reasons, for those single moments where everything went wrong. Was it a lost battle, a failed reform, a weak sultan? But the truth is softer, and at the same time, much heavier. The Ottoman Empire did not fail suddenly in a single catastrophic event. It aged. It grew cautious where it needed to be bold. It struggled to change without breaking itself apart. And in the end, it simply became unnecessary. The world had moved on, and the empire, once the center of that world, was now a relic of a bygone era. Now, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to drift, imagine Istanbul one more time. The Bosphorus is dark and calm. The lights of the city reflect gently on the water. The great mosques stand silent, their magnificent domes still watching over a city that has outlived countless empires. The Ottomans ruled for centuries, long enough to see the entire world transform beyond recognition. When their time finally ended, it ended not with rage, but with a quiet sigh of resignation. Like a weary giant, exhausted from the let the silence deepen further, as if even memory is growing tired. What remains now is not power, not authority, but echoes soft, distant, and impossible to erase. Long after the empire ended, its shadow continued to move through the world in subtle ways. New nations wrote fresh constitutions, raised new flags, and taught new histories. Yet they could not fully escape the structure the Ottomans had left behind. Courts still echoed with legal logic, born in imperial reforms. Bureaucrats still followed pathways designed for sultans. Even rebellion often used the language of the empire it rejected. The foundation, though invisible, was still there, shaping what grew on top of it. In Istanbul, the palaces did not crumble, they were emptied. Rooms once filled with whispers of intrigue now held dust and sunlight. Tourists would one day walk through them, unaware that decisions shaping continents had once been made in those same corridors. The empire became an exhibit, frozen in time, while the city outside rushed forward, a living, breathing metropolis that had shed its imperial skin but not its soul. The Topkapi Palace, once the heart of a global power, became a quiet museum, its treasures locked behind glass, its stories whispered by tour guides instead of courtiers. Families passed down stories in fragments. A grandfather remembered a tax collector who spoke gently. A grandmother remembered soldiers taken away in winter, never to return. These memories were not written in books, they lived in pauses, in sighs, in the way certain songs made eyes soften without explanation. The empire survived not as glory, but as feeling. It was the scent of coffee brewed a certain way, a style of architecture in an old quarter, a shared joke that only made sense within a specific cultural context. It was personal, intimate, and woven into the fabric of daily life. Across former Ottoman lands, identity remained complicated. Borders drawn after the empire's fall cut through villages, tribes, and traditions that had never belonged to one nation alone. Suddenly, people who had been neighbors for centuries found themselves on opposite sides of a national line. Conflicts flared, cooled, and flared again. Many of these struggles were not new, they were simply exposed once the imperial balance vanished. The Ottomans had ruled by allowing difference to exist. Under one authority, it was a system of managed diversity, where various religious and ethnic communities had a degree of autonomy. When that authority disappeared, difference no longer had a referee. Religion, language, and ethnicity hardened into lines that could no longer bend easily. The empire had, in a way, delayed these tensions for centuries. Its absence released them all at once, leading to the complex geopolitical landscape we see today in the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa. Yet, there was also renewal. With the heavy weight of the empire lifted, new energies were unleashed. Cities like Beirut, Cairo, and Thessaloniki reinvented themselves. Cultures that had been part of a larger imperial mosaic began to speak more freely. In their own voices, literature, music, and art found new expressions, exploring identities that were no longer defined by their relationship to Istanbul. The end of empire allowed stories that had been quiet to finally speak aloud. Loss and creation moved together, inseparable, like two sides of the same coin. A period of profound change brought both pain and promise. As time passed, the word Ottoman slowly changed its meaning. It no longer described a living state. It became a period, a style, a memory. It was invoked with nostalgia by some, who remembered a time of perceived order and grandeur. It was met with criticism by others, who saw it as an era of occupation and stagnation. And it was approached with curiosity by many, who sought to understand this complex chapter of human history. The empire became something people argued about, precisely because it could no longer answer for itself. It transformed from a political reality into a historical concept, open to endless interpretation. And still, its presence lingered in the ordinary, in the rhythm of daily prayer echoing from minarets built centuries ago, in the layout of old neighborhoods, with their winding streets and communal courtyards, in recipes cooked without knowing their age, dishes that had traveled across the empire, picking up new ingredients and flavors along the way, in proverbs that carried wisdom shaped by centuries of imperial life, offering guidance on everything from business to family. These were not monuments, they were continuities. They are the living threads that connect the present to a distant past, often without us even realizing it. The empire's legacy isn't just in the grand mosques or palaces, it's in the small, everyday things that shape how millions of people live, think, and feel today. Now, as your thoughts grow heavier and more distant, imagine the empire as a long breath finally released. 600 years inhaled, a period of expansion, consolidation, and immense power. 600 years exhaled, a slow decline, a final collapse, and a long, lingering afterlife. The world it ruled no longer exists, but the air it moved through still remembers. The cultural, political, and social currents it set in motion continue to flow. The Ottoman Empire was never just sultans and wars. It was time itself, stretched, layered, patient. It held millions of lives together long enough for them to leave traces in one another, creating a shared heritage that transcended the political entity that birthed it. It was a crucible where cultures met, clashed, and merged, creating something new and enduring. And as sleep finally draws you under, let this be the last image, a vast, ancient palace at night. Every lamp extinguished, every door closed, not in fear, but in rest. The empire has finished speaking. Its armies are silent. Its decrees are history. Now it dreams, quietly, inside history, inside us, inside the very world we inhabit. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey through time meaningful, consider subscribing for more explorations into the echoes of the past. Let everything slow even more now, as if the last remaining thoughts are dissolving into darkness. What follows is not history as dates or names, but history as weight, the gentle pressure of centuries settling into the ground. When the Ottoman Empire fell, time did not rush forward all at once. It hesitated. In former Ottoman lands, people woke up in the same houses, walked the same streets, and prayed in the same buildings, yet they belonged to different countries than the day before. Flags changed faster than habits. Empires, you see, vanish much quicker on paper than they do in the human mind. Life had to adapt. Old officials found new roles. A clerk who once stamped documents for a sultan now stamped them for a republic or a kingdom. His desk might be the same, the ink might be the same, but the seal was different. Soldiers who had sworn loyalty to the empire simply pledged it again under new symbols. Life continued, because it had to. The Ottoman Empire had taught its people endurance above all else. For 600 years, they had weathered plagues, invasions, and internal strife. The end of the empire was just one more storm to endure. In the heart of it all, in Istanbul, the city learned how to live without being the center of the world. Trade continued. Ferries still crossed the Bosphorus, their wakes cutting through the same ancient waters. Coffee was poured the same way it always had been, thick and dark, a ritual unchanged for centuries. But something invisible had shifted. The city no longer looked outward to command distant lands from the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula. It looked inward, learning how to exist simply as itself. The grand ambitions were gone, replaced by the simple, everyday reality of survival and reinvention. The great mosques remained unchanged. Their domes still caught the first light of morning. Their courtyards still cooled the hot afternoon air. They had outlived emperors before. They would outlive nations too. Stone remembers longer than power. These magnificent structures were a silent testament to a past that was both gone and ever present. They stood as anchors in a sea of change, their minarets pointing to the same sky that had looked down upon sultans and janissaries, merchants and poets. Across the vast territories of the former empire, the memory of Ottoman rule became selective. It was not one single story, but a mosaic of countless different experiences. Some remembered tolerance, a time when different faiths and peoples coexisted under a single, overarching authority. They recalled the millet system, which allowed religious communities to govern their own affairs. For them, the empire was a lost golden age of cosmopolitan harmony. Others remembered taxation and conscription. They remembered the divirum, the levy of boys taken from Christian families to serve the state. They remembered the weight of a distant, often arbitrary, authority. For them, the end of the empire was liberation, a chance to forge their own destiny free from imperial control. Each memory was true in its own way. The empire had been too large, too long-lived, to be reduced to a single judgment. It was a complex and contradictory entity, capable of both great cultural achievement and profound cruelty. New generations grew up hearing the empire spoken of as something distant, almost mythical, a time when one ruler governed from Budapest to Baghdad. The sheer scale of it felt unreal. The idea of the empire became larger, more romanticized than its reality had ever been. It became a story told to children, a backdrop for novels and films, a grand, sprawling epic of power, intrigue, and decline. And yet, the lesson of its decline remained quietly relevant, a whisper through the corridors of history. Power that cannot change hardens. Systems built for one world struggle to survive in another. The Ottomans did not fall because they were blind. They were deeply aware of the challenges they faced. They fell because they were cautious in an age that rewarded speed. Their attempts at reform, the Tanzimat, the constitutional experiments, were often too little, too late. They were trying to repair a vast, ancient ship while it was being battered by the storms of nationalism, industrialization, and global competition. By the time they recognized the need for fundamental change, the world had already moved on. As the decades and then centuries moved forward, scholars, poets, and filmmakers returned to the Ottoman past again and again. They mined its history not because it was perfect, but because it was vast. It offered endless stories of faith and doubt, of cruelty and mercy, of breathtaking brilliance and frustrating stagnation. The empire became a mirror in which every subsequent age saw its own concerns reflected. For some, it was a warning about the dangers of imperial overreach. For others, it was a model of multicultural governance. It was a source of national pride, a symbol of past glory, and a cautionary tale all at once. Now, as we near the end of our journey, imagine the empire as a long coastline at night. Waves have struck it for centuries, each one leaving its mark. Slowly, almost invisibly, the shore has changed shape. No single wave destroyed it, time did. The ceaseless, patient, relentless action of time. The Ottoman Empire ruled longer than most powers ever will. It adapted, it resisted, it learned, and it endured until endurance itself became the burden. When it finally rested, the world barely noticed, not with a bang, but with a quiet exhale. A new world had already begun. Let this be the final feeling as we close this chapter. History does not always end with noise and fury. More often, it ends with quiet continuation, with lives lived the next morning, with cities waking under familiar skies. The empire is gone, but the night remains. Let the last thoughts loosen now, like sand slipping gently through open fingers. What remains of the empire at this hour is not structure or memory, but atmosphere, a feeling that settles softly over everything that came after. In the years that followed, people rarely spoke of the Ottomans in daily life. They spoke of work, of weather, of children, of survival. Empires matter most while they exist. Afterward, they become background, like mountains you no longer notice until someone points them out. And yet, the Ottoman past shaped choices even when no one named it. Borders hardened. Passports replaced loyalties. Where once a man could travel from Damascus to Sarajevo under one authority, now he needed permission, documents, and explanations. Movement, once ordinary, became political. The loss of empire was also the loss of ease. Still, habits endured. The way elders were addressed, the respect for order and paperwork, the expectation that authority should feel distant, slow, and formal. These were not taught by new states, they were inherited. The empire had trained its people to live within systems, and systems rarely disappear overnight. In quiet homes, old objects remained. A seal ring, a faded document written in Ottoman script no one could fully read anymore, a medal earned in a forgotten war. These items were not displayed proudly. They rested in drawers, taken out only when memory demanded it. The empire lived in these small silences. As decades passed, nostalgia grew softer. Distance turned complexity into romance. The past became smoother than it had ever been. People spoke of coexistence, of lost elegance, of order and dignity. Others remembered fear, censorship, forced service. Both memories were real. Time does not choose sides, it blurs edges. The Ottomans had once believed their rule was natural, even eternal. That belief was their greatest strength, and later, their greatest weakness. They adapted slowly because they expected time to wait for them. Time never does. Yet there is something gentle in the way their story ended. No final massacre in the capital. No burning of the city. No last emperor dying on the steps of a palace. Instead, paperwork, ships, speeches, and silence. History closed the door carefully, almost respectfully. Now, as sleep deepens and thoughts fade like lanterns along a dark road, imagine the empire not as a fallen giant, but as a long evening finally giving way to night. The heat has passed. The noise has softened. What mattered has already happened. The Ottoman Empire has become part of the earth it ruled, in stone, in language, in memory. It no longer asks to be obeyed. It only asks to be remembered, quietly, without urgency. And with that, let the story rest. No battles remain. No decrees wait to be signed. No borders demand defense. Only the calm understanding that even the longest reign must eventually sleep. And that history, like you now, drifts onward, gentle and unafraid, into the dark. This gentle fading, this quiet dissolution, is perhaps one of the most misunderstood aspects of the Ottoman legacy. We are so accustomed to empires crashing down in fire and fury, but the Ottoman story is different. It's a lesson in how power can recede like a tide, leaving behind a reshaped shoreline. Think about it. For 6 centuries, this empire was a constant, a seemingly permanent fixture of the world. It was a bridge between East and West, a cradle of cultures, and a formidable military power. Its collapse wasn't a single event, but a long, drawn-out process that began long before the final sultan boarded his ship in 1922. The internal pressures, the rise of nationalism, the relentless advance of European industrial and military might, all these chipped away at the empire's foundations for decades. This slow decline is what makes its afterlife so fascinating. The new nations that emerged from its ashes, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, the Balkan states, all had to define themselves against their Ottoman past. They adopted new alphabets, new legal codes, new national myths. They actively tried to forget. And yet, the ghost of the empire lingered. You could see it in the architecture of the old cities, from the grand mosques of Istanbul to the caravanserai along ancient trade routes. You could hear it in the languages, peppered with Turkish loanwords. You could even taste it in the cuisine, where dishes like baklava and kebabs became national treasures in countries that were now fiercely independent. This inheritance wasn't always welcome. For some, it was a reminder of a period of subjugation. For others, it was a link to a golden age of cosmopolitan harmony. This duality is key. The Ottoman past is not one story, but a million different stories, all coexisting, often in contradiction. Let's delve deeper into this idea of inherited systems. The Ottoman state was, above all, a bureaucracy. It was a complex machine of tax collection, record keeping, and law. When the empire dissolved, this machinery didn't just vanish. The new states inherited its framework, even as they tried to build something new. The concept of a strong, centralized state that is deeply involved in the lives of its citizens, that's a very Ottoman idea. The way people interacted with authority, the lines they stood in, the stamps they needed on documents, these mundane rituals were echoes of an older time. This created a strange tension. People were citizens of new, modern republics, but their daily experience of government often felt remarkably similar to the old imperial ways. It was a source of both stability and frustration, a familiar weight that was hard to shake off. And what about the people? The human cost of an empire's end is often overlooked in grand historical narratives. Families were torn apart by new borders. Communities that had lived together for centuries suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of a political divide. A merchant from Aleppo might have once considered a journey to Izmir a domestic trip. Suddenly, it was an international voyage, fraught with paperwork and suspicion. This loss of a shared world, a common space, was profound. It created a deep sense of dislocation and nostalgia. This isn't just about romanticizing the past. It's about a genuine sense of loss for a world that, for all its flaws, felt larger and more interconnected. The empire, in its prime, had provided a kind of unity, a common identity that transcended local and ethnic differences. Its disappearance left a void that nationalism struggled to fill. Let's consider the cultural memory. For a long time, the official histories of the new nation-states painted the Ottoman period in a negative light. It was often portrayed as an era of stagnation and oppression, the sick man of Europe that had to be overthrown for progress to begin. But alongside this official narrative, a different kind of memory was preserved in families, in stories passed down from grandparents. These were memories of a different time, a time of relative peace, of diverse cities where different communities lived side by side. These personal memories often clashed with the national narrative, creating a complex and layered understanding of the past. It's only in recent decades that historians and the public have begun to embrace this complexity, to see the Ottoman legacy not as a simple story of decline, but as a rich and multifaceted heritage that continues to shape the present in countless ways. This brings us to the romance of the past. Why do we find ourselves drawn to the image of the lost empire? Perhaps it's because distance smooths out the rough edges. We forget the harsh realities, the brutal wars, the political repression, the deep inequalities. Instead, we see the beauty, the exquisite art, the magnificent architecture, the rich intellectual traditions. We imagine a world of elegance and order. This nostalgia is a powerful force, but it's important to approach it with a critical eye. We must remember that the coexistence we often praise was built on a strict hierarchy. The order was maintained through a powerful state apparatus. To truly understand the Ottoman legacy, we must hold both these truths in our hands: the beauty and the brutality, the tolerance and the intolerance, the glory and the decay. The final act of the empire was strangely quiet, almost anticlimactic. There was no epic final battle for Istanbul, no heroic last stand. Instead, there was a political transition, a vote by the new Turkish Grand National Assembly that abolished the Sultanate. The last Sultan, Mehmed VI, left the city not as a captive, but as an exile, slipping away in the early morning on a British warship. It was an end marked by legal documents and political maneuvering, not by sword and fire. This quiet end speaks volumes. It suggests that the empire was already gone in spirit, that its time had passed, and that even its staunchest defenders knew it. It was a recognition that a new era had begun, and the old world had to make way. So, as we reflect on this immense historical tapestry, what is the ultimate takeaway? It is that empires don't just die, they transform. They dissolve into the soil, the culture, the very DNA of the lands they once ruled. The Ottoman Empire is not a relic of the past locked away in a museum. It is a living presence, a whisper in the wind that can still be heard if you listen closely. It is in the way a Turkish coffee is prepared, in the design of a tile in a Damascus courtyard, in the legal codes of a Balkan nation. It is a story not just of sultans and viziers, but of ordinary people whose lives were shaped by its rise and fall. It is a reminder that history is not a series of grand events, but a continuous flow, and that the past is never truly past. It is always with us, shaping who we are and who we will become. Let the last edges of thought soften now, as if even remembering requires effort. What remains is not a story, not an analysis, but a gentle aftertaste, the feeling left behind when something vast has finally passed through the world. We think of empires as rising and falling, as loud, dramatic events, but what happens after the fall? What happens when the noise stops? Long after empires fade, people continue living inside their echoes without realizing it. Think about it. The streets you walk on might follow old imperial routes. The markets you visit might have opened where caravans once rested. The very laws of a nation can still carry the logic of rulers long gone. The Ottoman Empire, in this way, became invisible precisely because it was everywhere. It shaped the ordinary so completely that it stopped being noticed, like the air we breathe. Generations were born into a new world. Children grew up learning new histories, waving new flags, singing new anthems. In their textbooks, the empire became a paragraph, then a chapter, then just a question on an exam. It was history, something finished and filed away. Yet when those same children, now adults, walked through the old neighborhoods of Istanbul, or crossed the ancient bridges spanning the Golden Horn, or heard the call to prayer echo across the water, they were still moving through Ottoman space. Stone does not forget its first purpose. The foundations of a mosque, the walls of a fortress, the cobblestones of a marketplace, they hold memory in their very structure. The Bosphorus itself, that great artery of water, continued to flow, indifferent to crowns and constitutions. It had watched Greek triremes and Ottoman galleys, Victorian steamships and modern ferries. It had reflected the banners of sultans and the flags of republics alike. Water, unlike empires, remembers change without resisting it. The empire had once tried to resist time. The water never did. It simply flowed, carrying the past into the present. In quiet moments, you might hear elders speak of the past, not in terms of politics or power, but as a rhythm. Life felt slower. They might say, decisions took longer to make. Authority felt heavier, but also more distant. A force you knew was there, but didn't encounter every day. These weren't praises or criticisms, just observations. They were describing a different pace of existence, a tempo set by an empire that had mastered the art of slowness. And perhaps that is its final, most subtle lesson. The Ottomans ruled for over 600 years, not just because they were always strong, but because they mastered patience. They waited while other powers rushed into costly wars. They absorbed cultures and peoples while others sought to destroy what they couldn't understand. They endured, weathering storms that brought down countless others. For centuries, this patience was a source of immense strength. But in the end, patience became inertia, and inertia became a final, heavy rest. Every empire believes it is necessary. Every empire tells itself, and its people, that the world will fall apart without it. It presents itself as the sole guarantor of order, peace, and civilization. And yet, when they go, the world continues. It may be altered, scarred, and for a time, deeply confused, but it keeps breathing. The Ottomans were no exception. Their absence created a vacuum filled with pain, conflict, and a profound sense of loss. But it also created space. Space for new voices to be heard. Space for different futures to be imagined. Space for nations to write their own stories. Imagine, for a moment, history itself closing a long, heavy book. The cover is worn, the leather cracked with age. The pages are dense with names, places, and lives lived. This book isn't thrown away or burned. It is placed carefully on a shelf in the great library of human experience. There it will remain, waiting for hands curious enough to open it again, to read its lessons, to feel its weight. The Ottoman Empire is no longer awake. It does not command armies. It does not defend its borders. It does not expand its influence through conquest. It simply exists as memory, as influence, as a quiet presence beneath the surface of the modern world. You can find it in the curve of an arch, in the flavor of a coffee, in a word that has traveled across languages and centuries. And now, as we reach the end of this reflection, there is nothing left to hold on to. No dates to memorize, no victories to weigh, no defeats to explain. There is only the soft, deep understanding that time does not erase its layers. History builds upon itself, one era over another, and somewhere beneath the present, beneath the noise of our own time, beneath your own drifting thoughts, the long, slow breathing of history settles into silence. The story has finished telling itself, for now, but its echoes remain, waiting for us to listen. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this perspective interesting, consider subscribing for more explorations into the quiet currents of history. We'll see you in the next one. Let everything finally grow still, as if even the past has closed its eyes. There is nothing left to explain now, only a sense of completion, the quiet that follows a story told all the way to its end. The Ottoman Empire has become distant, not far away, but deep below, like foundations buried under a living city. People walk above it every day without feeling the weight. Yet the ground would not be the same without what lies beneath. This is how long histories survive, unseen, supporting what comes after. Every empire believes it is writing the final chapter of the world. The Ottomans believed this too, not with arrogance, but with faith. Faith in law, in order, in continuity. For 600 years, that faith held. It built mosques that touched the sky and palaces that mirrored paradise. It codified laws that governed dozens of cultures and administered vast territories from the gates of Vienna to the sands of Yemen. This was the Pax Ottomana, an era of relative stability enforced by a powerful, centralized state. The Sultan wasn't just a ruler. He was the shadow of God on earth, the protector of the faithful, and the arbiter of justice for all his subjects, regardless of their creed. The empire's strength was its remarkable ability to absorb and adapt. It was born from Turkish tribes in Anatolia, but it grew by embracing the traditions of the lands it conquered. It took the administrative genius of the Byzantines, the artistic flair of the Persians, and the scholarly traditions of the Arabs, and wove them into a unique tapestry. The Janissaries, an elite infantry force, were composed of boys taken from Christian families in the Balkans, raised as loyal servants of the Sultan. This system, the Devshirme, was brutal, yet it created a meritocracy that allowed individuals to rise to the highest echelons of power, based on talent, not birth. The courts of Topkapi Palace were a world unto themselves, a complex dance of power, intrigue, and ceremony. The Grand Vizier managed the daily affairs of the state, while the ulema, the religious scholars, interpreted Islamic law. Eunuchs guarded the imperial harem, a secluded world where the Sultan's mother, the valid Sultan, often wielded immense political influence. This intricate system of checks and balances, of competing factions and loyalties, was the engine that powered the empire for centuries. From Istanbul, decrees flowed out to provincial governors, judges, and tax collectors, binding a sprawling, diverse population into a single political entity. But the world outside the palace walls was changing. While the Ottomans perfected their system, Europe was undergoing a radical transformation. The Renaissance sparked new ways of thinking, the Reformation challenged religious authority, and the Age of Discovery opened up new trade routes, bypassing the Ottoman-controlled Silk Road. Suddenly, the economic and military balance began to shift. The silver flowing from the Americas destabilized the Ottoman economy, causing rampant inflation. European military technology, particularly in artillery and naval warfare, began to surpass that of the once invincible Ottoman armies. The world started asking different questions, and the old answers no longer fit. The Siege of Vienna in 1683 is often seen as a turning point. What was meant to be the ultimate triumph became a costly defeat, signaling the end of Ottoman expansion into Europe. From then on, the empire was largely on the defensive, fighting to hold onto its vast territories against the rising powers of Russia and Austria. The question was no longer how to expand, but how to survive. What remains is not regret, it is understanding. The Ottomans were neither villains nor saints. They were builders who outlived their blueprint. They ruled because they learned how to balance fear and mercy, tradition and change. The millet system, for example, granted non-Muslim communities significant autonomy to govern their own affairs, a testament to a pragmatic tolerance that was rare for its time. They fell because that balance became harder than belief. In the 19th century, the sick man of Europe, as Tsar Nicholas I called the empire, attempted a series of sweeping reforms known as the Tanzimat. The goal was to modernize the administration, the military, and the economy along Western lines. New schools were opened, a modern legal code was introduced, and the principle of equality for all citizens was declared. But these efforts were a race against time, and they created new tensions. Modernization threatened the power of traditional elites, while the new idea of nationalism, imported from Europe, began to fracture the empire's multi-ethnic fabric. Greeks, Serbs, Bulgarians, and Arabs began to dream of their own independent nations. In the end, no one conquered them in the way they had conquered others. They were undone by time's quiet persistence. Each reform arrived late, each victory cost more, each loss lingered longer, until holding on required more strength than letting go. The decision to enter World War I on the side of the Central Powers proved to be the final, fatal miscalculation. The war devastated the empire, leading to immense suffering, including the horrific Armenian genocide, a dark stain on its final years. By 1918, the empire was defeated and occupied, its fate in the hands of the victorious Allied powers. The story could have ended there, with the Sultanate being carved up and dissolved by foreign powers. But a new chapter was about to be written. From the ashes of the empire, a Turkish nationalist movement emerged, led by a brilliant and determined general named Mustafa Kemal. He and his followers rejected the Allied partition of Anatolia and fought a war of independence, creating a new, modern, and secular nation-state, the Republic of Turkey. In 1922, the last Ottoman Sultan was sent into exile, and the 600-year-old empire officially ceased to exist. Now, the empire rests where all long stories rest, in memory, shaped by those who tell it. It is not a simple memory. Some will remember justice and a well-ordered society. Some will remember the brutal suppression of revolts and the suffering of conquered peoples. Some will remember the grandeur of the Suleimani Mosque and the intricate beauty of Iznik tiles. Some will remember the silence that fell after centuries of power. All of these memories are true, because empires contain every human contradiction at once. They are creators and destroyers, patrons of the arts and enforcers of brutal law, centers of learning and agents of oppression. The Ottoman legacy is a complex inheritance, felt not just in Turkey, but across the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa. It lives on in the food people eat, the music they listen to, the architecture that defines their cities, and the unresolved political tensions that still shape the region today. As your breathing deepens and the world fades, imagine the Bosphorus one last time. Night water, smooth and dark, lights scattered like distant stars. No banners, no drums. Only the soft movement of water passing through a city that has learned how to outlive power. History does not demand attention forever. Eventually, it asks only to be allowed to sleep. And so the Ottoman Empire sleeps now, not defeated, not forgotten, but finished. Its story is a powerful reminder that all structures, no matter how grand, are temporary. They rise, they reign, and in time, they recede, becoming the foundation upon which new worlds are built. Thanks for joining us on this journey through time. If you found this story compelling, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one. Let the final layer of thought dissolve, as if even your memories are becoming part of a dream. We're stepping into a space of stillness, a quiet left behind after something truly immense has passed. This isn't a story about the Ottoman Empire itself, not its battles, its politics, or its grandeur. It's about the silence it left in its wake. Imagine time moving on, gently, but without any hesitation. New generations were born, people who never bowed to a sultan, who never spoke his name with fear or reverence. For them, the empire wasn't a lived reality. It was a distant echo, a shadow stretching across the pages of textbooks and the surfaces of old, weathered stones. Yet, even without knowing it, they inherited its rhythms. They walked through cities built to gather people inward, not spread them out into endless suburbs. They found peace in courtyards designed to encourage a moment of pause, a deep breath. They meandered down streets that curved and twisted instead of rushing straight ahead toward a destination. They inherited a way of living that accepted slowness as natural, not as an inconvenience. These weren't just architectural accidents. They were the ingrained habits of an empire that had learned the secret to lasting for centuries. It understood that endurance isn't about speed, but about a steady, deliberate pace. Now, think about the world beyond those lands. It accelerated. It got louder, faster, more demanding. Machines began to replace patience. Speed replaced ceremony. Decisions were made in an instant, often without deep reflection or consideration of the consequences. In that stark comparison, the Ottoman past can feel heavy, deliberate, almost sleepy, and maybe that's exactly why its stories linger so powerfully, especially in the quiet hours of the night. It's because the Ottomans belonged to a fundamentally slower world, a world where time didn't unfold in news cycles and headlines, but across entire generations. It was a time when rulers expected to govern for decades, not just a few years, a time when buildings were designed with the ambition to outlive not just their creators, but their creators' children and grandchildren. That world is gone, of course. We can't go back, but the longing for what it represented remains. People return to the history of the Ottomans not just to understand the mechanics of power or the strategies of sultans. They return to escape the constant, nagging sense of urgency that defines modern life. They return to remember what it felt like when change came slowly, when continuity mattered more than novelty, when there was a belief in permanence. In this way, the empire becomes a place to rest. The mind, a mental sanctuary, Even though it was once a place of great struggle and conflict, it becomes a story that helps us slow our own breathing. And now, as sleep draws closer than conscious thought, imagine history itself growing quiet. The loud arguments of historians begin to fade. The harsh judgments soften and lose their edge. What remains is a simple, profound awareness that everything, no matter how vast or powerful, has its season. Every empire, every life, every idea. The Ottoman Empire had its vibrant morning, its long, sun-drenched afternoon, and its endless, twilight evening. And when night finally came, it arrived gently, without a great deal of resistance. The end wasn't just a dramatic collapse, it was an acceptance of a cycle completed. That is its final, most subtle legacy. Not the maps, not the battles, but the lesson of acceptance. The story has settled into a profound stillness, like fine dust finally resting after centuries of movement, of turmoil, of life. Nothing is waiting now, nothing needs to be explained, nothing needs to be defended. It simply is. And as you let yourself drift fully into sleep, allow that quiet stillness to carry you. Let it be calm, deep, and unbroken. Let it hold you the way time holds all things, eventually guiding them, gently and surely, into rest. Good night. Thank you for listening. Let the darkness feel complete now, as if the mind itself has stopped reaching for meaning. There is nothing left to follow, only the soft awareness that something long and heavy has finally come to rest. In this quiet, the Ottoman Empire exists only as a shape without edges, no dates, no borders, no grand battles. Replayed in your mind, just the sense of something vast that once moved slowly across the world and then, just as slowly, settled into the earth. Imagine a mountain, so ancient that its peaks have been worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. You don't see its sharp, jagged history anymore. Instead, you feel its presence, a silent, immovable weight against the horizon. The Ottoman Empire, in this deep quiet, is like that mountain. Its presence is felt more than it is seen. It's a texture in the air, a shadow in the corner of your eye. People still speak its name sometimes, not with the urgency of a news report, but with a gentle curiosity. A traveler might stand beneath the soaring dome of an ancient mosque in Istanbul, their hand grazing a cool marble pillar, and wonder who else stood in that very spot, centuries before. What were their thoughts? What did they hope for? The empire isn't a political entity in that moment. It's a shared human space, a container for countless lives. A reader, late at night, might trace a finger across an old map, their eyes following the faint lines of forgotten trade routes. They might notice how many disparate places, from the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula, once answered to a single city on the Bosphorus. These moments are brief, almost weightless, like a feather drifting on the air. Yet, it is these small, personal encounters that keep the memory alive, not as a lesson, but as a feeling. History, when it reaches this depth, stops being an instruction. It no longer tells you what to think or which side to take. It simply surrounds you. It becomes atmosphere. The empire is no longer a story of sultans and conquests, of laws and decrees. It becomes part of the night air, part of the profound quiet that makes sleep possible. It's a background hum, a constant, low frequency beneath the noise of the present day. And perhaps this is the final, inevitable transformation of all great empires. They begin as a spark of ambition in the mind of a leader. They grow into a roaring fire of power, consuming lands and cultures. They age into a heavy burden, groaning under the weight of their own complexity. And at last, they become silence. Think about that silence. No one rules in silence. No one resists it. There are no armies in silence, no rebellions, no declarations of independence. Silence belongs to time alone. It is the ultimate victor, the final state of all things. The grandest palaces and the humblest villages eventually fall silent, their stories absorbed into the land itself. As your thoughts drift farther and farther away, like boats leaving the shore, imagine the empire not ending, but dissolving. Picture a single drop of dark ink falling into a vast, clear glass of water. It doesn't just disappear. It spreads. It unfurls in slow, beautiful plumes. For a moment, you can see its shape, its tendrils reaching out. But soon, it diffuses, spreading until it is everywhere and nowhere at once. The water is no longer clear, but it is not black either. It is something new, tinged with the memory of the ink. In the same way, the empire dissolved into the world. Nothing was truly erased. The art, the architecture, the food, the words, the music, they all spread, blending with what was already there and what came after. Nothing remains distinct, but nothing is truly gone. The world continues, layered on top of what came before, like sediment at the bottom of a deep, calm lake. Cities like Sarajevo, Cairo, and Damascus breathe with a rhythm that was shaped, in part, by centuries of Ottoman presence. People dream in languages that carry echoes of Turkish, Arabic, and Persian. History rests beneath them, not as a ghost that haunts, but as a foundation that supports. It is untroubled and untroubling. It simply is. In this state of deep rest, there is no final lesson to be learned. There is no moral to the story. There is only the calm, steady understanding that everything, every ambition, every struggle, every triumph, every collapse moves towards stillness, and this stillness is not loss. It is not an absence. It is completion. It is the end of the struggle. Stay here in this quiet for a little longer. Let the weight of the day fall away. The story no longer needs words. It doesn't need you to analyze it or judge it. It just needs you to feel its immense, silent peace. The history of the world is a long, slow exhale, and you are here now, in the quiet moment after the breath has been released. Rest. There is nothing more to do. The silence holds everything. Let this be the last breath of the story, so gentle that it barely feels like an ending at all. There is nothing more for the Ottoman Empire to become. It does not wait for revival, for judgment, or for some grand return. It has settled fully into the past, the way the body settles into a familiar bed at the end of a long life. The struggle is over. The constant, relentless motion has stopped. What remains is a quiet, profound balance. When we think of the fall of great empires, we often picture cataclysm. We imagine fire, conquest, and ruin, the thunderous crash of something colossal being torn down. But the end of the Ottoman Empire was different. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a long, slow exhale, a gradual fade into history. To understand this ending, we must first understand the beginning. For over 600 years, the House of Osman ruled a vast, multicultural, and incredibly complex state that stretched across 3 continents. At its zenith, it was the center of the world, a bridge between East and West, governing lands from the Balkans to North Africa, from the gates of Vienna to the Persian Gulf. The story of the Ottomans is a story of incredible ambition and staggering success. It begins with a small Anatolian beylik, a principality, led by Osman I in the late 13th century. From these humble beginnings, it grew through conquest, diplomacy, and sheer force of will. In 1453, Mehmed the Conqueror captured Constantinople, a moment that sent shockwaves across the globe. He didn't just conquer a city, he inherited the legacy of Rome and transformed it into Istanbul, the vibrant heart of a new Islamic empire. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a symbolic one. The Ottomans were no longer just a regional power. They were the new Caesars, the protectors of the holy cities, and the dominant force in the eastern Mediterranean. Under rulers like Selim the Grim and Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire reached its golden age. The 16th century saw Ottoman banners fly over Baghdad, Cairo, and Belgrade. The legal system was codified, art and architecture flourished, and the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul became a hub of political power and cultural brilliance. The works of the great architect Mimar Sinan still stand today, monuments not just of stone and mortar, but of a civilization at the peak of its confidence. The empire was a mosaic of peoples, Turks, Arabs, Greeks, Slavs, Armenians, Jews, and countless others. While not a modern pluralistic society, it had a system, the millet system, that allowed different religious communities to govern their own affairs. For centuries, this intricate tapestry held together, a world unto itself. But no empire lasts forever. The very things that made it strong, its size, its diversity, its complex bureaucracy eventually became sources of weakness. The world around the Ottomans was changing rapidly. The Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Age of Enlightenment in Europe sparked new ideas about science, politics, and nationalism. Industrialization gave European powers an unprecedented military and economic edge. The Ottomans, once at the forefront of military technology, began to fall behind. The cannons that had breached the walls of Constantinople were now outmatched by European rifles and artillery. The trade routes the empire once controlled were bypassed by new sea lanes around Africa. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the balance of power shifted. The empire began to lose territory. The disastrous Second Siege of Vienna in 1683 is often cited as a turning point. From then on, the narrative was one of retreat, of holding on against rising tides. The 19th century was a period of desperate reform, known as the Tanzimat. The empire tried to modernize its military, its administration, and its society to catch up with the West. They built railways, established modern schools, and experimented with constitutional government. But these reforms were often too little, too late. More importantly, a new and powerful idea was sweeping across the empire: nationalism. One by one, the peoples of the Balkans, the Greeks, the Serbs, the Bulgarians rose up, demanding their own independent nations. The beautiful mosaic began to crack. The empire became known as the sick man of Europe, a term that, while dismissive, captured the sense of a slow, terminal decline. Yet, even in its twilight years, the Ottoman state showed remarkable resilience. It fought wars, signed treaties, and struggled to maintain its sovereignty in a world of aggressive colonial powers. But the final blow came with the First World War. The Ottoman leadership, a trio of young, ambitious, but ultimately reckless men, known as the Three Pashas, allied with Germany and the Central Powers. It was a gamble for survival, a desperate roll of the dice to reclaim lost glory and territory. But it was a losing bet. 4 years of brutal warfare devastated the empire's remaining strength. The Arab Revolt, fueled by British promises of independence, shattered Ottoman control over the Middle East. On the other fronts, from Gallipoli to the Caucasus, millions perished. By 1918, the empire was exhausted, defeated, and occupied by allied forces. The Sultan, Mehmed VI, was now a ruler in name only, a figurehead in a city controlled by foreign soldiers. The struggle was over. The motion had stopped. What followed was not a revival, but a dissolution. The Turkish War of Independence, led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, was not a fight to save the empire, but to build something new from its ashes: the modern Republic of Turkey. In 1922, the Sultanate was officially abolished. After more than 600 years, the Ottoman dynasty came to a quiet, unceremonious end. The world that followed did not replace the empire. It grew on top of it, layer after layer, moment after moment. The borders of the modern Middle East were drawn from its former provinces. The ethnic and religious tensions that plague the region today often have their roots in the way the empire was dismantled. Every era believes it stands alone, yet beneath it lies another, and another still. The Ottomans are one of those layers now, a foundational stratum, firm enough to support what came next, quiet enough not to demand our constant attention. And in that way, they have finally achieved something no empire ever manages while it is alive: peace. There are no more borders to defend, no more armies to supply, no more futures to control or rebellions to crush, only rest. Think of it. For centuries, the empire was in constant motion, expanding, defending, reforming, fighting for its very life. That relentless pressure is now gone. The weight of history has been lifted. If you listen closely, not with your ears, but with that fading edge of awareness just before sleep, you can almost sense it. The long exhale after 600 years of holding its breath. The profound relief of finally letting go. The story is complete. History has finished speaking. Time has turned the page, and the night has claimed the story. The legacy is not one of failure, but of completion. There is nothing left to carry forward from this story except the calm, certain knowledge that everything, no matter how powerful, how vast, or how seemingly enduring it is temporary, and that this is not a tragedy, but the natural order of things. The rise and fall are two parts of the same cycle. Now let the mind be still. The empire sleeps. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history. If you found this reflection meaningful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. It truly helps us continue to explore these deep and fascinating subjects. See you next time.